I know we had Oliver Hartwich's Idiot's Guide to the Budget on Monday. His more cerebral colleague, Eric Crampton, joins us now by video link from the New Zealand Initiative. You're looking pretty bright and bushy-tailed this morning, Eric. First, I just want to ask you, was there anything we didn't expect in that budget?
I wasn't expecting that it was going to take until 2038 to get core government spending as a proportion of overall economic activity back to pre-COVID levels. Grant Robertson's Great Wellbeing Budget of 2019, which had promised to solve every problem in the world and that nobody thought was austere. The Taxpayers Union put out a survey on this just this past week. I think the polling was conducted a couple of weeks ago. They asked people about the 2019 budget. Only 9% of respondents said that they thought that budget 2019 spent too little relative to the size of the economy at 29%. And something like a third said it was too much, another third in the middle, and then some that just didn't have a view. So there were at least three people who thought that it was spending too much for every person who thought it didn't spend enough. That is 29% of GDP. We are not going to get back to 29% of GDP until 2038. 18 years after the borders first closed, right? 14 years from now,
wow.
18 years after the borders closed, we're going to finally get the size of government back to where it was before the COVID crisis.
Wow, that is a long recovery period, isn't it? A really long recovery period. Can you explain to me, Eric, and it was meant to be, and it's being sold as a budget for tough times and full of restraint, what's the economics of $23 billion in savings over 4 years while you're borrowing an extra $12 billion over 4 years?
Well, the economics of it is that they are spending massively more. They inherited a budget situation where spending was well in excess of tax revenue, right?
Yeah.
So Labor had been borrowing to spend. We had a massive structural deficit. We still do have a structural deficit. At least the structural deficit they're pegging to have gone by 2027, if they manage to stick to some other parts of the budget lines that they may or may not stick to. But at least we're seeing a forecast to get out of structural deficit. I'll explain what that means. We normally focus on the Obergefell deficit. So whether the operating balance before gains and losses is neutral or negative or positive.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in a recession and unemployment is very high, it's normal to run an Obergefell deficit because tax revenue are lower as compared to normal times, and your spending on benefits is higher as compared to normal times. That's right. A defensible deficit. Yeah. A structural deficit is one that you get when, even if the economy is turning over at a normal rate of speed, you are still having to borrow to pay for the groceries. Okay, right. That's a structural deficit. Yeah. We have been in structural deficit for the whole period through COVID, and we're only going to be coming out of it in 2027. So that's why you're seeing spending coming down, but still having to borrow because we were spending so very much. The minor amounts of tax threshold indexation hurts government's revenues, but it only really accounts for a couple of years of inflation, and it'll all be undone within the next 4 or 6 years, right? So,
and what we don't have in regards to that is a new policy and a cross-party policy that says we adjust those brackets for inflation all the time. That's just the way we do it, and it seems like such a no-brainer, Eric.
Well, it's obvious to you and me, but the cross-party cartel loves getting extra revenue without having to go to Parliament for supply, right? So we get into this charade where every 14 years, after a whole pile of inflation has dragged people into higher tax brackets. I was looking at the numbers on this for 2023 before the budget. It looks like about 1 million people got pulled out of the bottom tax bracket and into the 17.5% bracket from 2011 through 2023, yeah. And another 800,000 got pulled from the 17.5% bracket into the 30% bracket. Okay, so that was fiscal drag, inflation pulling people into higher tax brackets. Now, I was judging it there with brackets indexed to income decile rather than, or wage and salary decile rather than inflation specifically. You can do it on CPI. We can get into that later if people are keen. Doesn't much matter. If you had properly adjusted the tax bands to keep people's positions relative to where they were in 2011 when these were last set, So in 2011, to hit the $14,000 tax band, you had to be earning more than like 29% of people.
Yeah.
That threshold now would be 28,000.
Okay? Yeah, and the Taxpayers Union made this observation. I think it was $49 a week in additional cost because we haven't moved those brackets for the last 14 years. And most people aren't going to claw that back a week with these changes, are they? We're still taking home less effectively, less spending power than we did 14 years ago. And this isn't going to change that a jot.
No, it barely changed. Well, 14 steps forward, 4 steps back, then you're going to get another 14 steps forwards, right? Yeah. That's the constant ratchet that we get into because government loves being able to count on fiscal drag to fund things that they want to spend without having to explicitly increase the tax thresholds because that might piss people off, right? So every decade we get to pretend, we get this charade and farce of there being a tax cut. It isn't a tax cut, it's a trivial inflation adjustment, but they have already overspent it, right?
Yeah.
So they're giving back
still got to borrow 12 bill. Yeah. Look, Eric, the other thing is in terms of the spending and where it's going, and so this isn't really the figures, it's the feel, it's the form. Do you think the reprioritisation of spending is good? Do you think we have cut wasteful spending?
Well, they made a good start, and they will have to do more if they want to stick to the lines that they've promised in this budget, right? So they've only got $14 billion over the next 3-4 years in operating in extra allowances to throw in for increased costs in different areas. I am hoping that it's just a start, not just because of that, but also because it takes ministers time to find their feet, to figure out what's actually going on in a department. This isn't a failing of the national government. This is a constant thing that the public sector always has an information advantage over their minister. It takes a while for the minister to figure out just what the hell's under the hood when they get in, and then figuring out how to unwind things. They've made a good start. There's still a lot of work to do. This is just a really, really trivial one. It's only $40 million a year, but they've kept the subsidy for video game makers, okay? So this one was announced last year. Minister Robertson made a big deal about it at the budget. Connor English had been the lobbyist to get it, and they were so happy that they're going to be subsidizing the video game industry. You would have thought that film subsidies are as bad, but they've been entrenched forever, and they're like this giant apparatus built up around it. It'd be harder to get rid of those. You'd think that a subsidy that's only been in place for 1 year, maybe you've got a chance now to get rid of it before it really entrenches itself, but they didn't touch it. I don't know whether there's an oversight or whether National thinks that it's a great idea to be subsidizing a video game industry.